The Divided Self by R.D. Laing, an existential way of looking at schizophrenia. Ronald D. Laing is a psychiatrist with a new way of treating schizophrenic patients. From an existential standpoint, Laing focuses more on the individual and their family. Looking at these patients existentially gives Laing a new starting point from which to judge a schizoid's way of dealing with themselves. Ronald actually breaks down the process of going mad. A lot of times, the schizophrenic is not dealt with as an actual human being. Many years ago, most doctors did not look past the fact that the patient is crazy. They relied on insulin and electroshock therapies. It never occurred to them that the treatment itself was crazy, not just the patient. Laing spent a lot of time with the patients and interviewed the families. The patient, to a certain extent, actually believed that he cared. Laing even went as far as to letting the patients live in his own home. After years of researching the families and the patients, he made many interesting findings. First, many of the patients would form a kind of bond with the doctors, and a schizoid's puzzled talk was usually just that, a puzzle. In most cases, the patient actually was testing to see if the doctor was either smart enough or cared enough to solve the puzzle to be able to help. The patients knew what kind of trouble they were in, and knew that the process would be painful for them. They needed someone intelligent and that they could trust, and trust is almost impossible for schizophrenics. Laing realized that he could not communicate with a schizophrenic in an I and you sense, because there is usually more than one I and you with a schizophrenic patient. It can almost be broken down to an ego, superego, id scenario, but Laing actually goes a step further. He actually breaks down the different personalities of the patient. In most cases, there is a bully type, a parenting type, sibling types, and the original real self. Through Laing's existentially way of not prejudging the patients, he's able to dig in and understand the patient and their different complexes. In Laing's book, he has a few different case studies, and all of them are related from the starting point. Authentic self-disclosure is what happens to the patient when the real self becomes non-existent. The false self actually controls and sort of convinces the real self that being in this world is too dangerous. The false self disguises itself, so the individual actually is what other people want them to be. This starts at birth and directly affects the growth of the individual. The mother takes up a large part of the influence on a child's development as an individual. In feeding, it starts. As an infant, a human starts to develop as a person. Whether or not they agree would depend on if they feed too much or if that changes from time to time. In almost all of the patients, the mother said that they had a normal, good child. In one case, the eldest daughter would always finish her bottle, throw toys around, and play games with the parents. The mother felt that this daughter was a nuisance. Now the patient, when she was a baby, rarely finished her bottle, rarely put up a fuss, and never threw toys around or played games. In the eyes of the mother, she was a good child, but really the mother was stunting the growth of the baby. After the eldest daughter, she was not going to make the same mistake. She was going to make sure that her second child would not act in the same manner. This patient grew up being spoiled, too spoiled in fact that she never developed her own identity. When it came time for her to become herself, she could not. She was no one except her mother, and she ended up hating her mother for that, and even believed her mother killed her at a very young age. Most patients do not come from abusive families. They either come from families that smothered them or brought them up without paying very much attention. In one case, a boy's mother died when he was 8. He then took over the role of his mother by cooking, cleaning, sewing, and so on. When he went to college at the age of 18, he was a strange individual, and the instructor brought this to the father's attention. Once again, the father said that his son was always good and normal. What had happened was the son never became a person or had a real self. His false self was his mother. When he had to go into the real world, his false self convinced his real self that people would not understand. This induced his strange behavior. If people do not know the real individual, then no one can hurt him. As a child grows up in these kinds of situations, they start to develop feelings of worthlessness. The child also feels disconnected and feelings of phoniness. This is understandable because they have been pretending to be what other people want, this whole time never developing as an individual, and that is where the real self starts to lose control. After enough time goes by, the person feels as though they have no genuine self. They start to develop anxieties and really forgetting who they are altogether. The mind and the body actually split. In everyone's life, they have a feeling as if they are living outside their bodies, especially in times of immense stress. Unfortunately, schizophrenics live this way. They live in a world where they do not feel alive, real, or whole. This way, if one is dead, then no one can kill you. 3 specific types of anxieties that develop are the fear of engulfment, implosion, and petrification. In the fear of engulfment, the individual actually believes that they can be absorbed into another. They do not like to make eye contact because they think that they can actually be actively taken over by another individual's mind and losing their own identity altogether. Implosion is the belief that the inside is an empty cave or vase, and if they let anyone in or leave their guard down, it will implode. The cave or vase is very brittle, and if the false self ever disintegrates, the walls will cave in. The fear of petrification is the most interesting. Similar to Medusa, that the gaze will turn one into stone, the gaze of others can turn another into just an object or even turn them dead to that person. The schizophrenic will build up many defenses to this, and of course, with each defense, more layers of problems start to form. To counter the anxieties, the individual will not let anyone close to them. At first, the individual will be more what other people want him to be or her to be, but eventually the false self despises himself and the others around them for making him this way. The person may start to act like other people, usually mimicking or imitating people they already know. Since the individual has no real self, they really have no imagination because they have always lived as someone else. To change, they must become someone else that they have already met. They look at other people as objects, and in a way turn them to stone before they can do the individual any harm. By the end of this whole process, the real self is buried so deep, and multiple false selves have confused each other as to who is real anymore, and where the real world is anymore. With the help of some old philosophy and his ideas on them, Laing actually creates his own method of treating the schizophrenic. Laing attempts to characterize the nature of a person's experience of his world and himself. The doctor must relate to the schizoid without passing judgment and understand the reality of their situation. By doing this, we can try to understand the mad things that schizophrenic patients do by being in their world existentially. Existentially, the concretum is seen as a man's existence, his being in the world. Unless we begin with the concept of man in relation to other men and from the beginning in a world, and unless we realize that man does not exist without his world, not can his world exist without him. We are condemned to start our study of schizoid and schizophrenic people with a verbal and conceptual splitting that matches the split up of the totality of the schizoid being in the world. Robert D. Laing.